Alright guys, what's up and welcome to the Triple Click podcast, and in today's episode we are going to go more in depth to the MOW Wireless, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the keyboard switches as well. That we haven't really gone to keyboards before, but this is going to be interesting. And then we have some other things we're going to talk about, but let's go straight to the point and talk about the MOW Wireless. So basically at the moment PZOGEL is the only one who has it, and you have been using it for a while, I guess. Has it been like a week or something?
Yeah, roughly 4 or 5 days now.
Okay. So what are the initial impressions, or basically the impressions?
Well, we've already talked about my impressions a bit the last time. I've been able to finish my sensor testing now, and the results are somewhat interesting because basically I'm always with wireless mice that can be used both wired and wireless. I'm always doing testing such that I can tell both the wireless delay itself and whatever sensor delay there is, basically wired delay. And the interesting thing about the MOW Wireless is that the wireless delay itself is rather small, or it's not really impactful in terms of overall motion delay. Basically, wireless delay is around, difficult to say for sure, but it's around 1 to 1.5 milliseconds, which is barely worse than Logitech or Razer. Razer is around, I don't know, 1 millisecond, maybe 0.8, and Logitech is similar. So purely in terms of wireless delay, MOW Wireless is actually very competitive, just barely worse than the best right now. On the other hand, there is some sensor delay, base sensor delay of around 1.5 2 ms, and that is the biggest influencing factor when it comes to latency, overall latency. So the overall latency ends up being roughly 2.5 to 3 milliseconds, which is comparable to what SteelSeries has. The RAW3 Wireless I've tested a couple of weeks ago has 2.5, around 2.5 as well. So yeah, Glorious is definitely not on the same level as Logitech or Razer right now with the MOW Wireless, but the interesting thing is that, like I said, most latency is coming from wired delay, and we'll have to see, maybe with some firmware updates and further optimizations, it might be possible to bring down latency quite a bit. If the wired delay would be eliminated entirely, latency would be 1.5, which would be really good. So we'll just have to see what kind of updates Glorious will be able to release. But yeah, other than that, mouse is really good in terms of build quality, really impressive. It's just 69 grams, which is barely more than the regular wired Model O. And yeah, clicks and scroll wheel and so on are perfect on my copy, of course. Might be just review sample, golden sample, entirely possible. but yeah, no complaints about that. And what I really like is the charging cable, because it's so light. I mean, the Razer Ultimate cable, for example, is quite flexible as well, but this charging cable is flexible to the point that it's possibly even more flexible than the cable of the regular wired Model O. And yeah, it's just very impressive to see that. And with the charging cable, it can be used as if it were a wired mouse, which is nice as well. And yeah, I mean, battery life, can't really tell, haven't used it enough to give any reliable verdict, but it should be mostly accurate from what I can tell. So roughly around 70 hours without RGB, which isn't worse than what Viper Ultimate, for example, can do. So yeah, all in all, good mouse, and hopefully with some improvements to motion latency, it'll be even better.
Do you know whether, because you said last episode that Glorious are making their own software. I know, for example, with Logitech and G-Hub, they will push firmware updates through the software. With Razer, at least with the DevAdder V2 Pro, you have to download an external app to update the firmware. Do you know if Glorious have the capability of pushing firmware through the software?
They do. They have this entirely new software now, which is built on Electron, which is yeah, a bit less reliable than the old one and a bit more resource heavy. But yeah, the functionality is there, and actually I can get firmware updates without having to plug the mouse in, which I'm not sure whether it's possible on Razer or Logitech. Do you need to plug it in? I don't know.
I believe you need to plug it in, yes. Like when G-Hub updates, you get the notification, like with the what's been included, but obviously unless you have the mouse plugged in, it's not going to do anything for you. And then with Razer, at least, I mean, I've not had a firmware update on any of my keyboards previously, but with the V2 Pro, the only reason I knew there was a firmware update is because I went onto their support page, and it's an entirely different application that you download and then run, and you have to have both the dongle plugged in and also the mouse at the same time.
Oh yeah, you just have to, of course, you have to have the dongle connected and the mouse needs to be running, but other than that, it just auto updates if it works. I mean, for me it's been working, but apparently some people had issues with the update process, and generally the software isn't quite as good as it should be probably on release. Quite a few bugs still. Also with polling rate in wireless mode, all polling rates but 1000 hertz are basically not working. You have periodic, it's not drops, but rather it just goes up to 1000 for a couple of reports and then drops down to 250 or 500 or whatever it's set to. So it doesn't really work. Only 1000 hertz is really usable right now, but I expect those sort of bugs to get fixed rather soon.
I mean, that's been popping up all over the place, right? Polling rate issues, just generally. I had the DM6 Holy S that wouldn't hold 1000 without dipping. We both had the M4 from Extrify. Credit where it's due, though. They fixed that within like a week, basically, when we reported it. But different lighting profiles giving different levels of stability when it came to polling rate, and now the Model O Wireless. I'm sure they can fix it. Just very interesting that it seems to be cropping up recently.
Yeah, I've actually never paid too much attention to it. Only tested one RGB effect usually, but yeah, you basically have to test every single one and never really know whether polling stability will be the same compared to not having RGB enabled. Yeah, I don't know why it's popping up so often lately. Maybe just because I'm actively looking for it right now, and actually all those mice were horrible all those years. I just didn't notice.
Yeah, possible.
Which is possible. But yeah, it's definitely a bit curious that so many mice seem to struggle with 1000 hertz when 8K hertz is around the corner.
And I got one more question actually before I let Camis finally speak for the first time this episode. Have you ever done any testing? We're talking about polling rate, but just generally speaking, with how far you have the little USB dongle away from the mouse and whether that impacts like motion latency? Because I think at some point today we were going to talk about whether if you didn't know there was input latency, whether it would actually be an issue or whether it's the knowing of it that makes it an issue. But obviously you get the extenders, right? Which is designed to be as close to the mouse as possible. Have you ever tested that?
Yeah, I've tested it with just plugging the dongle in at the back of the PC. So instead of 10 centimeters, it's, I don't know, 50 or 60. Mm-hmm. And the motion delay was the same. I guess if you go even further, maybe 90 or 100 centimeters, it might impact motion delay, but I'd rather imagine it would negatively affect polling stability and just general reliability. So if there is any sort of interference coming from outside or whatever, it would most likely result in, I don't know, periodic dropouts or stuff like that. I guess motion delay won't really be negatively affected before the connection itself crumbles.
Because that's my only thing I hate actually about wireless peripherals in general is we spend all this effort to get all the cables off the table, now at least when, latency is as low as it is. And then we have these dongles all over the place. I mean, the Razer mouse dock is quite pretty in itself, but you've got Razer with their own extender. You've got Logitech with their own extender. Now, glorious. It all looks different. And I don't know, some kind of unifying little box thing would be nice, hidden away. Maybe I've got to glue it underneath my desk or something. I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the dock I do like, but for example, the Logitech adapter thing, it doesn't look that good and it doesn't stick on your desk that well if it's there. And yeah, but there is some interesting details about the MOW Wireless. For example, the fact that they managed to make the wireless latency very low, but then the wired latency is higher than. That's quite interesting. So they have made some mistakes somewhere along the line.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, wired latency, even under worst conditions, should never exceed 1 millisecond, which is polling rate delay. Maybe if you design it really badly as possible, you could say 2 milliseconds, but that's pretty much doing it as disadvantages as possible, and shouldn't really be designed that way. So I'm not sure where that latency is coming from. Actually, I've had an early prototype of the Model O Wireless where that delay was present as well. So it seems to be, I don't know, some ongoing issue, possibly even with the sensor itself, because I've had quite a few mice with 3335 sensors, which is closely related to the 3370, and a lot of them had those base sensor delay issues as well. Don't really know where it's coming from, but it's quite quite noticeable.
Yeah, yeah. Really interesting. Hopefully they can fix that with some firmware upgrades or something, but I doubt that because if it's if it's seen in other sensors already, similar sensors, but still other sensors, it might be something else completely.
Yeah, I mean Asus with ROG Chakram and the ROG PZOGEL 2 have been able to solve those issues. So it seems to be possible to get rid of that delay, but it's quite curious that it's popping up again and again.
Yeah.
At least it's a Model O and not a Model D as far as I'm concerned, so I can happily skip this one and wait for them to fix it.
Yeah, it would be nice if they could improve it for the next releases. Basically, just treat the Model O Wireless as a stepping stone for future products.
At least for me, like now I know it's there, that's reason enough for me not to want to use it. That's why I like your reviews and why I like reviews, graphics card reviews in particular, that don't just talk about average frames, but talk about the minimum frames. It's those kind of details that like make a review good for me. And just knowing alone, I probably wouldn't pick it up. But looking at other reviews of it already, some people seem to not notice it. I'm not going to go into whether the skill level of the reviewers has any impact on that, but maybe people that use it day to day won't notice it. It's going to be interesting to see because you got to be honest, not everybody reads Tech Power Up, not everybody watches my reviews, not everybody watches even Rocket Jump Ninja reviews. So people out there might be using it and not knowing and be more than okay with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's always something I've been wondering about because when I'm doing my reviews, I always do the latency testing first and then hop in game. And of course, if I measure 4ms motion delay and miss any shots, of course, I'll be second guessing myself and blame the latency rather than myself. But it's always doubtful whether it's actually the latency that's affecting my game, or is it just my preconception that there is this sort of latency and basically it's just psychologically impacting my game, and the actual latency wouldn't be so bad, but it's rather me knowing that there is latency, which makes me play worse. I don't know. It's difficult to tell whether it's
Not
actually.
only that, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
I just say not only that, but to really like have a fair blind test, you would have to have the exact same mouse with the exact same sensor position, with the exact same weight, the exact same like feel, weight distribution. It would have to be almost identical to having one with motion delay for you to know that there might be something there, because without that, even the sensor position alone, or even a slight DPI variance of 30 could be what you're feeling instead of motion delay sometimes. So it'd be such a difficult thing to really crack down on. That's why I think it is mainly, or even possibly just placebo, even though it's there, of course. I just mean like you almost knowing or not knowing.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, of course, I'm blaming the motion delay, but maybe just the feet are bad, or weight doesn't suit me, or the shape isn't for me, or I just have a bad day. Maybe I just play badly that day, and then the next day maybe I'm playing better, but first day was bad, and therefore I say it's the latency which is negatively affecting me.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for me, when I test the Rival 3 Wireless, I mean, you could sort of maybe feel that it's not as snappy as the Razer Viper Ultimate or the G Pro Wireless, but the Rival 3 Wireless, I mean, I still performed pretty much just as well as with those two with that mouse. And I could sort of, feel it that it wasn't as fast, but I had no clue that it was, what was it, three times slower as the Razer and the Logitech ones.
Well, that one alone has got pretty far back sensor position as well, which can also make, at least in my experience, trying, I think it was the nail shaped mouse from Dream Machines. I forget what it was called, but the sensor position on that is really far back. And I think that has a bit of motion delay as well, but combined, it just wasn't for me.
Yeah. I think the sensor position for me is mostly about just getting used to it. It doesn't matter to me that much when I'm just, comfortable with it, but it's irritating to have those lower sensor positions, because especially if you review a lot of mice, so you have to switch a mouse like once a week or something, and then you have to get used to the sensor position, and I don't know why they even do that at SteelSeries. I mean, in some episode, PZOGEL said that they have done that for years or something, so it must be just their way of designing mice. But I actually have one question about the MOW Wireless, at least one more question. So basically, last episode we mentioned that it had the 3370 sensor, and now you have some more information about that. But as well, I'm interested about that. Does it have lift-off distance configuration in the drivers?
Yes, it has, but as far as I can tell, it's not working right now. So, either it's just firmware issue and might get fixed, or it's something more fundamental. Maybe something up with the specifically glorious SROM they're using might be. I don't know, but as of right now, it's not really possible to adjust it, or at least on my pad, it didn't change anything. But I guess it's just straight up not working.
Okay. Because it's interesting, because as you said that it's pretty much the same or very similar to the 3335, and I've tested now two mice with that 3335 sensor, the Rival 3 Wireless and then the Pulsefire Haste, and neither one of those has lift-off distance configuration in the drivers for some reason, although that sensor has native lift-off distance configuration.
Yeah, the 3335 has the ability on a hardware level, and it's just a matter of exposing it within the software.
Yeah.
But I think the lower limit should be a bit higher on the 3335. So 3370 on the lowest level should be roughly equal to 3360 or 3389.
Okay, yeah.
Talking about the 3389, I know haven't Extrify sent the M42 to all three of us today, or at least me and Cami. Have you got one on the way, PZOGEL?
I got mine earlier this week.
Oh, okay, because that's the big thing with the M4 for me, was the lack of liftoff distance, which eventually corrected my poor form, and I like low liftoff distance now, but I'm really curious to see whether they've added it into the M42, because they told me they can do it. They just need to find the time, and obviously if the demand is there. So I'm wondering if there's going to be button combinations for that, possibly.
Yeah, I checked the manual. I didn't see any, but I barely checked it out. I mean, I looked at RGB configuration is there and stuff like that, but yeah, I think the default lift-off distance on the 3389 is it's great. It's really low for me. It's very good. But that's actually what's also interesting to me. Do you happen to know, PZOGEL, that is the lift-off distance configuration algorithm or something? Is it more like, is it better on the 3389 and what's the Razer Focus Plus sensor again? Like, which is it? Is it the 3390 or made from that, or what was it?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Focus Plus is the internal code name is 3399,
99,
but
okay, yeah.
I'm not sure what it's derived from.
Yeah,
From what I can tell, it's not related to the 3335, just based on how it performs. Maybe it's related to the 3389, but it might be just something completely different, also possible. I do know that it's majorly co-developed by Razer, and of course it has a lot of functions which put to great use in recent Razer mice, such as the ability to run really high frame rates, which is needed for 8000 hertz polling, for example.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, what's interesting to me is that, for example, from Synapse, you can set that smart tracking option. And when you set it to 1 millimeter, it's sort of it's like 1 millimeter less than the default setting, I guess. I guess by default, the sensor has the sort of 2 millimeter lift-off distance for pretty much all mouse pads, and that's what I like. Compared to the 35, it doesn't seem to be that much, it doesn't seem to take the surface as a factor that much, because when I'm testing a mouse with 3389 and the Focus Plus or the Hero sensor, it seems to always be pretty much the same lift-off distance. Doesn't matter what mouse pad. So, do you know if there is the lift-off distance algorithm? Does it have some kind of thing, something that can sort of scan the surface? Like optical image recognition or something?
Yeah, I mean, I know the Hero sensor does it. It basically permanently adjusts lift-off distance based on surface quality, and 3360 and 3389 do have the ability to judge surface quality, and if it's really bad, if the image that the sensor is getting is too bad quality, the smoothing will be ramped up. So that's a special function of the 3360 and 3389 sensors related to surface quality. And yeah, I'm not entirely sure whether the 3399 does anything like that. It's also always a question, is LOD adjustment done natively on the hardware, or is it just a software solution? For example, the 3359 in the Viper Mini doesn't have native hardware level LOD adjustment. It's just not possible. So any LOD adjustment within Synapse is just software based. And most likely with software based approaches, surface quality doesn't really enter the mix, so to speak.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Interesting stuff. Do you have anything? I had something to ask about the MOW Wireless, but I don't remember it anymore. I guess that's good because we talked about that for 30 minutes. But do you guys have anything else to talk about the MOW Wireless, or should we go ahead and talk about keyboard switches a little bit?
I'm pretty much sorted on the Model. Nothing else to add. PZOGEL, I guess, probably finished. He's been talking about it for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I wanted to talk a little bit about mechanical switches, actually. I mean, my first mechanical keyboard was a Noppo Choc Mini when I was playing TF2 competitively. Before that, I was using a low profile switch. Not so much low profile, but I would say a low profile rubber dome. It was like a Razer Arctosa or something. But ever since the mechanical switches, companies have been creating gaming switches basically from that as a starting point. So you've got like the 4mm traditional cherry switches, which everyone obviously knows. Many people love them. Your reds, blacks, browns. Obviously now you've got speed switches and things like that. But those switches are huge, right? And there's something to be said about lower profile switches being superior. So to kind of break down how a switch works, if you just imagine a cherry switch, it's 4mm total height. A traditional cherry one will actuate, as in it will begin its initial movement in game or ability pop at 2mm, so halfway down. And then below that, you've got 2mm to bottoming out and 2mm back up. And that's kind of like your mechanical switch. And what companies like Razer or SteelSeries or Corsair are doing with the most recent optical switches is they're keeping almost the entirety of the 4mm total height and then simply reducing the initial actuation point. So instead of it being 2mm halfway, it's now 1. So that, whilst it might actually allow you to pop an ability quicker in game, for example, or start moving in game, you actually increase the distance after that to bottoming out. And that distance, whilst it might allow you to, for example, if you're holding shift to sprint in Apex Legends and roll your pinky onto control to slide, it will allow you to do that easier because it doesn't actuate right at the bottom of the key. As soon as you pass that initial actuation point, you basically enter what might as well be a dead zone where until the switch bounces back up to its reset point, the key remains active. So whilst we've gone for like a faster switch on the initial actuation, we've got this now increased distance after that to bottoming out that is, in my opinion, just like the opposite way that we need to go. So I've recently moved over to a G815 or G915 TKL switch, which is like 1.5mm actuation and 2.7mm bottoming out. So I still have a little bit after that, but it means as soon as I release the key, it almost immediately goes to its reset point. So if I want to do really, really small movements, I can just tap the key basically like that, as you heard, and I would stop moving. And I can do these tiny adjustments in Counter-Strike to align myself at angles without having to press crouch or walk to slow myself down. On top of that as well, without having this ridiculously, I would guess, high dead zone, it means that, I mean, when we play FPS games, right, I think I can speak for everybody where they don't just hover move, you know, you pretty much exclusively bottom it out. So whenever I want to alternate directions between A and D, I don't have to wait for one of my keys to bounce back up so far before the reset. You've got companies like Logitech with the G Pro X, which is basically a traditionally high switch. They've increased the spring resistance, so it bounces back quite quickly. But I'd be curious to hear your thoughts as to whether you've really considered this when using it or picking a keyboard for competitive FPS, because you just need to look at pro settings or even Twitch about me panels at the bottom. Everyone seems to be using mechanical switches, and I just don't understand why. I mean, I think I do. SteelSeries, for example, they had the M800 for a while, which was a 3mm key instead of a 4mm key. Nobody bought it because it had different keycaps that wouldn't fit on their normal keyboards, and it was different. So people just, I mean, it also looked like it was designed for kids, but I'm not going to go into that. But I'd be curious to know whether any of you have ever considered switches for gaming, or whether it's just been a case of pick whatever, they're all the same.
I mean, I can start. I have considered it and I have tested like multiple different switches and keyboards for gaming, but to be honest, I have never noticed, like, I've noticed the difference, but I have never noticed it to be like super beneficial for myself. So I end up using something that's just feels comfortable and a switch that I don't like actuate by accident. Of course, when you start using a keyboard with lower actuation points and stuff, at the beginning there are more of those misclicks, but you get used to it. But at the moment, I'm using the Razer Huntsman Tournament Edition, and I think this is a great like balance, sort of middle tier. That it's fast, but it's still it looks nice, doesn't look too gamery for me, and still it's quite good to type on. So yeah, but I'm not that much of a keyboard kind of guy. I've never seen that much benefit of using fast switches in the games that I play.
Well, I gotta admit, I'm not even using a keyboard with mechanical switches. I'm actually using I don't know, 15-year-old, I think, Logitech keyboard with rubber dome, which is indestructible, and I see no real reason to switch. Never been bothered by the rubber dome, and maybe different switches would offer some performance relevant improvement, but yeah, I don't know. I've never really looked into it or thought about switching. Don't really know why, because otherwise, of course, trying to get latencies down. But yeah, as long as it works, I'll stick with my 15-year-old $40 Logitech keyboard.
The thing is, though, with that Logitech keyboard, I would almost prefer to use that than some of the gaming mechanical switches, because you actuate right at the bottom of the switch. So as soon as you release it, you stop moving in game. Obviously, it takes a little bit longer to get to the bottom, but once you're there, it's just on and off immediately. I like a little bit of dead zone to do the shift and control action with my pinky, as I said, but as far as rubber dome goes, yeah, I'm still a fan of them. I saw Razer, they made a optical laptop keyboard. I would really like to see them come out with a full-sized freestanding version of that. I don't know if they're any good, what they feel like, of course, but I'd love to give them a go.
Yeah, I completely understand what you mean, though, because when we both played tournaments years ago, my first keyboard had those, I don't remember how many keys you could press at the same time. I think it was like 4. So I had issues like I couldn't strafe, go forward strafe and crouch and jump at the same time or something. So when I switched to a better keyboard, that was an insane boost I could press like 5 or 6 keys at the same time. I don't remember the exact number. I think it's called N key rollover or something, or used to be called at least that. But then when I bought my first mechanical keyboard, got my first mechanical keyboard, it was the SteelSeries 6G V2, and it had the cherry black switches. And the good thing about those is that they require so much force to bottom out that I actually never pretty much bottomed them out when I was moving in game with WASD, So I was always in the middle, sort of actuated the button, but wasn't completely bottoming it out. So I completely get what you mean, because I have been thinking a long time now about getting another keyboard with cherry black switches, because that was pretty much the only keyboard I had with those switches, because like a year after that, everybody started getting cherry reds, and those sort of just became the norm for gaming. And most gaming keyboards don't even have an option for getting those black switches. Those were nice for typing and gaming for me, at least back then.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I feel like the keyboards have just gone in a direction that, at least in my opinion, it's not really like a competitive gaming orientated direction. It does the job. I just think if they'd gone more of a heavier switch direction, maybe reduce the distance afterwards, we could be in a much better place now. But I would love to see more heavier switches. That's why I enjoyed using the G Pro X from Logitech for a while before I got this one, because they were the equivalent of reds but heavier, like a quicker bounce back, and it felt as you get toward the bottom, the resistance increased. So it was quite a nice option. But I know.
Yeah, for example,
Sorry.
yeah, sorry. For example, things like dodging in Quake Live was easier. Then same thing, strafing in CS:GO when you're dueling somebody, at range, strafing fast side to side. It was easier with those heavy actuation switches.
Yeah, that's what I would like to see next year for sure from companies.
Yeah, I mean, I've been wondering this for quite a while in terms of latency for keyboards. Because when I'm looking at Toxic, the Quake player, who has Fire on C on his keyboard and has been using that sort of setup for the past, 25 years, and played Quake 4 and won all those tournaments in Quake 4 and so on and on. And back then, keyboards had 125 hertz polling rate, or maybe even back with PS2 connectivity, maybe they had effectively 200 hertz, but either way, latency was incredibly high compared to button latency on a mouse, for example. And yet, Toxic has been able to hit pretty much all the shots others who weren't using that sort of setup were hitting as well. So I'm wondering, is it really necessary to get key latency down to such low levels for FPS games? Or maybe is it just way more important, possibly, for RTS games like StarCraft, where you have all those hotkeys, or MOBAs maybe, where there are just way more commands at any given time compared to FPS, where you have WASD and maybe 2 or 3 additional buttons.
Yeah, I think that's kind of like my point in a nutshell, though, because I feel like the way the keyboard switches have gone, they are beneficial for like your MOBAs and your RTS games, but the stuff where it's lacking as a result, like the distance after actuation, is the stuff that's really needed for first-person shooters. So it's and you got like the red switches are gaming orientated, but I would say black are more. Yeah, I don't know. It's a whole kettle of fish. I could talk for like 10 hours on this topic. But yeah, you're definitely right. I've got nothing else to add to this topic anyway. I mean, I have, but I haven't.
Yeah, it's interesting, yeah. But I will have to, after this talk, I will have to get that keyboard with those cherry black switches, or a low profile keyboard. I mean, I'll talk to you about after the video about those. So let's see if there is some that you can recommend for me.
Mm-hmm.
All right, that's pretty much it for today's episode, guys. I think next week we are gonna talk about the HyperX Pulsefire Haste a little bit, then maybe some other stuff. And then a week after that, we are gonna talk about the Xtrfy M42 more in depth. Maybe a little bit next week, but we'll see about that. But yeah, that's pretty much it. So if you are listening to this episode, you're most likely doing it on my channel or on Spotify, but you know where to find me, pretty much YouTube, House Gaming. Then on Twitter, I'm using House Games _ nickname. NVC you can find on YouTube, just NVC, and that's also his Twitter alias. And also you can find his streams on Twitch with the same name. PZOGEL you can find on Reddit. He has text reviews there, and then he does also them for Tech Power Up. And if you're interested in reading those, check the description for the links in those.
And finally, just quickly, it's Black Friday. So if anyone's watching this immediately and you're looking for a new mouse, keyboard, anything, now's the time to buy.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, that's it. Thank you for listening, watching, and thank you guys for joining me again. And yeah, see you next week.